Mr. Ferguson said, the government calls Elizabeth Berstler.
Elizabeth Berstler, called as a witness by the government, having been duly sworn, testified as follows.
The court said, please state your name and spell it and speak right into the microphone.
The witness said, Elizabeth Berstler, Elizabeth Berstler.
The court said, you may inquire.
Direct examination. By Mr. Ferguson.
Good morning, Ms. Berstler.
Hi.
Where do you work?
Morgan Stanley.
What's your position at Morgan Stanley?
Client Service Associate.
How long have you worked at Morgan Stanley?
16 years.
What are some of your duties and responsibilities as a client service associate at Morgan Stanley?
One of the administrative assistants on a team of financial advisors. I help clients with their day-to-day transactional request, checks, journals, wires, bill pay, new account opening.
And for a given account due, who is your boss for giving client account?
The head financial advisor on our team, Christina Schatz.
And you said administrative work. What sorts of things do you do in your day-to-day?
I process transactions, which are usually journals, internal transfers, checks, wire transfers. New account opening, helping clients with anything that they need help with.
Are bank deposits at Morgan Stanley FDIC insured?
Yes. Please.
The court said, if you'll speak into the microphone.
If a client with a brokerage account holds cash, what happens to that cash?
It's swept into the bank deposit program.
Ms. Berstler, are you familiar with a company called Crane Advisory Services?
Yes.
How are you familiar with it?
They had an account with us.
And who did you interact with at Crane?
Haitham Khaled.
What was his role at Crane, if you know?
I don't know.
And what was Crane to your understanding?
Some type of consulting firm.
Do you know what kind of consulting?
No.
And what did you do for Crane when they were your client?
Help with the wire transfers in and out.
Are you familiar with a company called G Clubs?
Yes.
And how are you familiar with it?
They had an account with us.
And who did you interact with at G Clubs?
Alex Hadjikaralambis.
And what was his role at G Clubs to your understanding?
Financial controller.
And what did you do for G Clubs when they were your client?
I helped process transactions, checks, journals, wire transfers.
Ms. Loftus, if we could publish Government Exhibit Stip 14, which is in evidence. We'll go to page 6. Ms. Berstler, you see at the top it says Morgan Stanley Smith Barney at the top?
Yes.
Pursuant to the stipulation, the government offers Government Exhibits 112 through 125.
Mr. Skirrick said, no objection.
The court said, they're admitted.
Government's Exhibits 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, 122, 123, 124 and 125 received in evidence. By Mr. Ferguson.
We can take that down, Ms. Loftus. Ms. Berstler, do you recall approximately when G Clubs became a client?
December of 2020 or January 2021.
And approximately what amount was the account funded with?
About 50 million.
What sorts of things was G Clubs paying for with their account at the start?
Business operational expenses, rent, payroll, event expenses.
Ms. Loftus, if we could please publish Government Exhibit MSS 112. If we can go to page 2. Thank you. Ms. Loftus. If we could actually scroll down. If we could blow up that bottom email. Now, Ms. Berstler. Who is this email from?
Alex H.
And what's the domain in his email address?
gclub.com.
Who is this email to?
To Christina Schatz.
Remind us what her role was?
She's the financial advisor.
Are you also a recipient on this email?
Yes.
Who's copied?
Haytham Khaled.
I can go ahead and read the body. It says, "Hi, Christina. Please find the information below in regards to the transfer we would like to schedule for tomorrow, January 19th, 21 from our account ending 8564 ADP and expenses." Just to pause. Ms. Berstler, do you recall the account ending 8564 was?
It was the account that they paid bills out of.
I'll continue reading. It says I have attached the beneficiary's account information for you as a reference. Please be aware that this account only accepts GBP. Again to pause. Ms. Berstler, what is GBP?
Great British Pounds.
And to read the stars. It says amount, 1 million USD. Beneficiary account name is Fiesta Property Developments, Ltd. And then there's more information. Ms. Berstler, at the time you received this email, did you know what Fiesta Property Developments Ltd was?
No.
And if we could scroll up to page 2, please. We can actually keep scrolling up. We'll go to page 1. I'll focus you, Ms. Loftus, if we could blow up the middle email. Ms. Berstler. What did you reply on January 20th at 9:02 a.m.?
Can you give a brief explanation purpose of this wire?
And do you recall why you asked for a brief explanation/purpose of the wire?
The outgoing wire had been flagged by our fraud operations department for some further explanation that the wire instructions had been verified.
We'll turn to that in a moment. Just if we could, Ms. Loftus, zoom on the top email. Is this a response from Alex H?
Yes.
I'll go ahead and read the body. It says, this transfer was initiated from G Club Operations LLC to Fiesta Property Developments, Ltd., a real estate holding company owned by Mr. He in the UK. Same owner of G Club's Operations, LLC. For a possible down payment on a property they plan to purchase for a total of $10 million. It says the transaction is recorded with an internal loan agreement from the lender G Club Operation, LLC. To the borrower Fiesta Property, LLC, for the amount of $10 million with a repayment plan. Ms. Berstler. So this email says that Fiesta Property Developments is a real estate holding company. Did you ever receive further information about Fiesta's business?
No.
It says the purpose is a possible down payment on a property they plan to purchase. Did you ever receive further information on the property being purchased?
No.
And then it references an internal loan agreement. Do you ever recall receiving the loan agreement?
No.
Do you know why Alex H specified the loan agreement had a repayment plan?
No.
Ms. Loftus, if we could now go to Government Exhibit MSS 125. If we could blow up the header. First, what's the date of this email?
January 20th, 2021.
Same date as the chain we were just looking at?
Yes, I think.
And who is it from?
Deidre Harrell.
Where does Deidre Harrell work at Morgan Stanley?
Fraud operations.
And who is this email to?
This email was to me.
And could you read the subject line of the email, please?
Urgent action, required outgoing wire review MS number 5520685564.
And 8564, do you recognize those numbers?
Yes.
What are they?
G Club's account number.
If we could zoom out, Ms. Loftus, and if we could zoom in on the bottom half with the body. Now. The email says, "Hello, I'm contacting you from fraud operations regarding the below wire. In light of increased events where fraudulent parties directly target clients, the following information is needed to verify the legitimacy of the wire request and the legitimacy of instructions the client has received. Fraud operations is requiring the response to the below questions in order to have the wire processed in a timely fashion. We appreciate your continued partnership to continue to protect our clients. And then, Ms. Berstler. Do you see under client account name, can you read the entity listed there?
G Club Operations LLC.
And the from account, can you read the last four?
8,564.
And the amount listed there, what is the amount?
734,000.
And had this wire been in GBP?
Yes.
If we could scroll down to the next page, Ms. Loftus. Now looking at these boxes. Let's first zoom on the first set of boxes, Ms. Loftus. Ms. Berstler, directing you to the... I guess the second from bottom row, could you read what is the text there in the left column?
The second from the bottom.
Yes, start with purpose.
Purpose of the wire manually input.
And there's nothing inputted there yet, correct?
Correct.
If we can zoom out. If we could zoom on the second box, please. Ms. Berstler. Could you read the text in the top box?
How did the client connect with Fiesta Property Developments, Limited?
If we could zoom out, please, and if we could scroll down. Here if we can zoom on the very top. Did Ms. Schatz forward this email to you on January 20th, 2021?
Yes.
If we could zoom out and scroll down, and if we could keep scrolling down. If we could zoom on the top email, please. Ms. Berstler, how did you respond to the email from Fraud Alert Escalations?
See answers below. Thanks.
If we could scroll down. We could go boxes. We'll zoom on the first box. Can you read the text? The answer to the text purpose of the wire?
This is a wire to an affiliated business for real estate investment.
Where did that information come from?
Alex's email.
If we could zoom out. If we could zoom on the bottom box. Could you read the answer to the top row? How did the client connect with Fiesta Property Ltd?
Fiesta Property Developments, Limited is another company owned by the UBO Howard and He.
Where did that information come from?
Alex's email.
And, Ms. Berstler, after you supplied this information, did the wire go out?
Yes.
Ms. Berstler. If you had known that the purpose of the wire given to you was not how the funds would actually be used, would you have processed this wire transfer?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
No.
Ms. Berstler, are you the final decision maker on wire transfers at Morgan Stanley?
No.
Now you responded to fraud operations email, correct?
Yes.
And you supplied the information given to you about the purpose of the wire?
Yes.
If you had known that the purpose of the wire given to you was not how it would actually be used, would you have passed on that information to fraud operations?
Mr. Skirik said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Can you ask the question again?
If you had known that the purpose of the wire given to you was not how the funds would actually be used, would you have passed on that information to fraud operations?
Yes.
You would have if you knew it was how it would not be used?
Mr. Skirik said, asked and answered, Your Honor.
Mr. Ferguson said, I think it was just confusion, Your Honor, with the question.
The interpreter said, Your Honor, can you ask all parties to speak into the mic? I cannot hear.
The court said, you can read back the question.
Record was read.
Mr. Ferguson said, if I could rephrase. If you had known the purpose of the wire given to you was not how they would actually be used, would you have passed on to fraud operations the purpose of the wire given to you as the real purpose?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
Mr. Ferguson said, I can rephrase.
The court said, the question assumes that she knows the real purpose. So yes, you can have another shot.
By Mr. Ferguson.
Ms. Berstler, if you had known that the purpose given to you was not true, would you have conveyed that purpose to fraud operations?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
The court said, you may answer.
We would have halted the wire and not have allowed it to go out.
Mr. Skirik said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained. Your answer is not responsive. If you knew that the purpose of the wire was not what was stated, it was a different purpose, would you have let your fraud department know that?
The witness said, yes.
Do you rely on a client to provide you accurate information about the purpose of a wire?
Yes.
And if you knew that a client was lying to you about it, do you rely on that information if you knew it was a lie?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Could you ask it again?
If you knew that a client was lying to you about the purpose of a wire, would you rely on that information and pass it on? The question is hypothetically.
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
Mr. Ferguson said, I'll just move on, Your Honor.
The court said, go ahead.
Let's go to page 10. Ms. Berstler, if you could read Deidre Harrell's response?
Thank you for confirming. The transaction has been released from review.
Ms. Loftus, if we could go to Government Exhibit MSS 113. If we could go to pages 3 to 4. Now. Who is this email from?
The email is from Alex H.
And what's the date?
January 25, 2021.
So 5 days after the initial wire request?
Yes.
And it's to you and Christina Schatz, right?
Yes.
Who's copied?
Haitham Khaled.
And again, what is the amount of this wire request?
$5 million.
And where is it going?
Fiesta Property Developments Limited.
And I won't ask you to reread it. Is the same purpose given beneath the wire details?
Yes.
And if we could just go up to page 1. Did this second wire go out?
Yes.
Let's go to MSS 114, Ms. Loftus. We can scroll down slightly. If we could zoom in on Alex H's email. The bottom one. Another email from Alex H, right?
Yes.
And this is about a week later, February 2nd?
Yes.
And again to you and Christina Schatz, right?
Yes.
And what was the amount of this wire?
$4 million.
And who is the beneficiary?
Fiesta Properties Developments Limited.
And I won't ask you to reread it, but is the same purpose given beneath the wire info?
Yes.
And if we can go back up to page 1. Do you see you responded, or can you read your response? The middle email?
Alex, we bought 2,932,000 British pounds today. I'll call you tomorrow morning to confirm the wire.
And did this wire ultimately go out, Ms. Berstler?
Yes.
Ms. Loftus, let's now go to Government Exhibit MSS 116. Let's go to page 3, please. If we could zoom on this email. What's the date of this email from Alex H?
May 6, 2021.
I can go ahead and read the body. It says, "Good afternoon, Liz. Please find the information below in regards to the one-wire transfer we would like to schedule from our accounts." He says I attached the beneficiary's account information for you as reference. And then there's wire information. What is the amount of this wire?
$20 million.
What's the account name?
Deltec Bank and Trust Limited.
What country is the vendor address listed?
The Bahamas.
Now, beneath that, a few rows beneath that it says bank's name Citibank. What do you understand that to mean?
That's the clearing bank.
And what's a clearing bank?
It's the bank we wire the money to for the beneficiary.
And can you explain to the jury what you mean by that, how that works?
The money is wired to Citibank. Deltec Bank and Trust Limited have an account at Citibank.
And then beneath the bank name, do you see it says reference/memo?
Yep.
And can you read what it says to the right of reference/memo?
100-179601 Hamilton Digital Assets, FDSP.
What's your understanding of what a reference/memo line is?
It's usually used for further credit to a further beneficiary.
And what do you mean by that?
So it would be the further credit to Hamilton Digital Asset account at Deltec Bank and Trust.
The court said, "What is your understanding of the role of Citibank in this transaction?"
The witness said, "They're the bank that receives the money on behalf of another bank."
Ms. Berstler, do you know what Hamilton Digital Assets is?
No.
Do you know what the numbers, the 1001796 refer to?
No.
Focusing on the last line there, Ms. Loftus, the internal reference info. Ms. Berstler, what's your understanding of internal reference info means?
That would be what G clubs would put in their books for their records, as to what the wire was for.
And what does it say in that row?
Cash dividend distribution.
And if we could zoom out and go to the top, just top of page 1. Did this wire go out, Ms. Berstler?
Yes.
Let's go now, Ms. Loftus, to Government Exhibit MSS 118. If we could just scroll down 1 to 2 so you can see the email. If we could zoom on Alex H's email. What's the date of this email?
May 11th, 2021.
The court said, "One moment. It's 11:30. Time for our half-hour break. Remember that you're not permitted to discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't permit anyone to discuss the case in your presence. Don't read, watch or listen to anything from any source that touches on the subject matter of this case. We'll resume at noon."
The law clerk said, "Jury exiting."
The court said, "You may step out of the courtroom, Ms. Berstler. Don't discuss your testimony."
Witness temporarily excused. Jury not present.
The court said, "Please be seated. Is there anything before we resume at noon?"
Mr. Skirek said, "Nothing from the defense."
Mr. Ferguson said, "Nor from the government."
Recess.
The court said, "Please have the jurors brought in."
Jury present.
The court said, "Please be seated. Remember that you're still under oath."
The witness said, "Yes."
The court said, "You may continue the inquiry."
Mr. Ferguson said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
By Mr. Ferguson.
Ms. Berstler, would you take steps to process a customer's wire if you knew the purpose provided by the customer was false?
No.
Mr. Skirek said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "You may answer."
Mr. Ferguson said, "Ms. Loftus, if we could go back to Government Exhibit MSS 118. And if we could scroll down slightly and just zoom on Alex H's email." All right. Now, Ms. Berstler, we were looking at this before the break. Can you remind us what the date is?
May 11th, 2021.
All right. And what's the amount being requested here?
$15 million.
And where is it going to?
Deltec Bank and Trust Limited.
Mr. Ferguson said, "Ms. Loftus, is it published?" Okay. Now the amount is $15 million, right, Ms. Berstler?
Yes.
And what's the account name it's going to?
Deltec Bank and Trust Limited.
And the vendor address, is that the same address in the Bahamas?
Yes.
All right. And the reference/memo, is that the same reference/memo?
Yes.
And then what is the internal reference info provided here?
Loan.
And do you recall what the last one to Deltec Bank said?
Dividend distribution.
Do you have any independent knowledge of whether this was in fact a loan?
No.
Did you just rely on the information provided?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, "All right. If we could zoom out and go to page 1. Did this wire go out?"
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, "All right. Ms. Loftus, let's go to Government Exhibit MSS 119. All right. And if we could zoom in on Alex H's email. What's the date of this email from Alex H., Ms. Berstler?
June 21st, 2021.
And what's the amount of this wire request?
$35 million.
And same destination as the last two?
Yes.
And same reference/memo as the last two?
Yes.
What's the internal reference info here?
Loan.
All right. And I'll read just the body up top, which says, "Please find the information below in regards to the first of the one-wire transfer we would like to schedule from our accounts today, June 21st, 21 for 35 mm. As discussed, I will send you another wire request this Wednesday, June 23rd, 21 for the remaining 15 mm. Ms. Berstler, do you recall why the transfer was broken into two different wires?"
No, I don't remember.
All right. Let's go to MSS, and did this wire go out?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, let's go to MSS 120. And if we could scroll down slightly. All right. What's the date of this email, from Alex H?
June 23rd, 2021.
And what's the amount of this transfer?
$15 million US.
Same recipient info?
Yes.
What's the internal reference info on this?
Loan.
All right. And Ms. Berstler, do you recall, looking at these wire transfers? What the total amount was sent to Hamilton Digital Assets at Deltec Bank?
$85 million.
And this is June 23rd. The first we looked at was May 6th. And approximately what time period was that sent?
About a month and a half.
Mr. Ferguson said, Ms. Loftus, let's go to MSS 122. All right. And if we could just zoom on the top email, Ms. Loftus. All right. Who is this email from?
Alex H.
To whom?
Sorry.
Who is it to?
Christina Schatz.
And are you copied?
Yes.
What's the date of this email?
July 15th, 2021.
And what's the subject?
Statement of account.
All right. And Alex H says, good afternoon, Christina. Please find attached statement of account as requested for G Club International Limited. What was G Club International Limited?
I don't know.
And Ms. Berstler, do you recall why this was requested?
Nope.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. Let's zoom out. And if we could scroll. Let's first read the bottom email, Alex H's email. All right. Ms. Berstler, do you see this as an email from Alex H to David Fallon?
Yes.
And what's the date of the email?
July 14th, 2021.
All right. And what's the subject?
Statement of account.
All right. And Alex H says, actually, let me ask you, do you know who David Fallon is, Ms. Berstler?
No.
Did you ever speak to David Fallon?
No.
He says, hi David, based on the phone call we just had, Alex says this. Based on the phone call we just had, can you please provide me a summary receipt, statement of account, that we have with Hamilton Digital Assets containing all information? Mr. Ferguson said, and if we could zoom out, please. And just zoom on the middle email. What was David's reply, Ms. Berstler?
Hi Alex, please find attached the statement of account for G Club International.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. And if we could zoom out. And actually, we'll keep going down. We'll go to page 3. All right. Now, yeah, if we could zoom, just pull up the text so it's larger. Thank you, Ms. Loftus. All right. Ms. Berstler, do you see in the top right it says, NAV Fund Services, Cayman, Limited?
Yes.
Do you know what NAV Fund Services is?
No.
And then just focusing you. The large bold text towards the middle that says Hamilton Digital Assets Fund SP, a segregated portfolio of Hamilton Opportunity Fund SPC. Do you know what a segregated portfolio is?
No.
Do you know what Hamilton Opportunity Fund SPC is?
No.
Okay. And then beneath that, oh, and what's the issue date in the top left here?
June 3rd, 2021.
All right. And so focusing you in the box beneath, what's the name listed there?
G Club International Limited.
And what was the name of the G Club entity that was a Morgan Stanley client?
G Club Operations.
All right. So the focusing on the next row, what's the transaction?
Subscription, by cash amount.
And what's the amount?
$15 million.
And then what's the effective date there?
August 1st, 2021.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. Now let's go to the next page, Ms. Loftus, please. And if we could zoom on the text just to make it larger. Okay. Now what's the issued date here, Ms. Berstler?
July 14th, 2021.
That's the same date as Alex H's email? Mr. Ferguson said, we can zoom out and scroll up.
I don't know.
Mr. Ferguson said, can you scroll up to Alex H's email? And if you want to zoom on the date. Or can you read the date, Ms. Berstler?
Yeah, July 14th, 2021.
Same date?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. Let's scroll back down, please. We can zoom on that text. All right. Now what's the name listed on this one?
G Club Operations LLC.
And is that the name of the entity that was a Morgan Stanley client?
Yes.
All right. And what's the amount listed there?
$85 million.
And what's the effective date?
August 1st, 2021.
And $85 million, is that the same amount that Morgan Stanley transferred to Hamilton at Deltec?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Berstler, do you know what these dates? The effective date or the order, I'll start with effective date. Do you know what that means?
No.
Do you know what order received date means?
No.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. Ms. Loftus, let's go to MSS 121, please. And if we could go down to the first email, page 4. All right. And if we could zoom on Alex H's email. All right. Now, Ms. Berstler, what's the date of this email from Alex H?
July 12th, 2021.
And I'll go ahead and just read the third paragraph in his email, which says, this is in regards to the $10 million we sent back in January to Fiesta Property Developments Limited. The agreement was for £10 million sterling, not $10 million. This was myself and my team's error. He says, based on our transaction history, we transferred over $8,060,000 worth of GBP. We need to wire the remaining $1,940,000 worth of Great Britain pounds. And then he says, please use this email as authorization. And in the beneficiary account name beneath that. What's the beneficiary account?
Fiesta Property Developments Limited.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. And if we could scroll up, Ms. Loftus. And if we can zoom on the response. And Ms. Berstler, how did you respond?
I wrote, total sent to Fiesta so far is £7,326,000 sterling. On January 21st, 2021, £734,000 sterling. January 27th, 2021, £3,660,000 sterling. February 4th, 2021, £2,932,000 sterling. If you needed £10 million sterling total sent to Fiesta, we would need to send £2,674,000 sterling.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. And if we could scroll up, please. And then, yeah, we can zoom on Alex's email. All right. And then Ms. Berstler, just focusing you on the address line. Could you read the address line? In Alex's email.
TransferWise, 56, Shoreditch High Street, London, E1, 6JJ, United Kingdom.
Do you know what's at that address?
No.
Do you know what TransferWise is?
No.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. You can zoom out. And we can scroll up. And we can keep scrolling up. You can keep going. All right. And Ms. Berstler, did this wire go out?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. Let's go to MSS 124, please. All right. And if we could, let's start at page 2, the first email. Let's zoom on that, please. Okay. So this is from Alex H., right?
Yes.
And what's the date?
July 29th, 2021.
And who is it to?
It is to Christina Schatz.
And who is copied?
Me.
And what's the subject?
Returned wire.
And could you read Alex H.'s email?
Good afternoon, Christina. Attached you'll find the wire that was returned to us. It was the funds we sent to Fiesta in British pounds. Can you let us know if you see any activity on the back end? I don't see the return in our account. Thank you.
And this is about 2 weeks after that last Fiesta wire?
I think.
Mr. Ferguson said, if you could scroll up, please. All right. And if we could zoom on, thank you. Is this July 29th again?
Yes.
And this is from you?
Yes.
Could you read your response, please?
Alex, I checked with our back office on this. Funds were not sent to Morgan Stanley following the correct GBP wire instructions. Therefore, MS never received this wire. Please have the sending bank trace the wire from their end. In addition, we would not have been able to accept this wire, even if it was sent correctly, since the account is only allowed outgoing same-name wires to G Club. All incoming third-party wires would be returned. Fiesta should wire funds to another G Club account. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Ms. Berstler, when you wrote, we would not have been able to accept this wire even if it was sent correctly since the account is only allowed outgoing same-name wires to G Club. What did you mean by that?
At this point the G Club account header was blocked from any third-party transactions by another department at Morgan Stanley.
Ah.
The court said, what do you mean by third-party transaction?
The witness said, to any account that is not in the name of G Club operations.
And Ms. Berstler, based on your time at Morgan Stanley, why are some accounts only allowed same-name transfers?
If another Morgan Stanley department is monitoring the activity and investigating an account, they might only allow you to do same-name transfers.
And what departments do that?
I guess fraud operations, our AML department, and our global financial crimes department.
And what's AML?
Anti-money laundering.
Mr. Ferguson said, all right. And if we could zoom out and scroll up. Yeah, let's zoom on the top one. Could you read the last response here? I'm sorry. Withdrawn. What's the date of this email?
August 5th, 2021.
And could you read your further reply to Alex H.?
Unfortunately, I was not given approval to enter the recall request for this wire, and was reminded that the account is allowed outgoing same-name wires only and a returned wire would not be accepted. Sorry.
And the account is allowed outgoing same-name wires only. What were you referring to there?
That the account was blocked, and only outgoing wires to another G Club account was allowed.
Mr. Ferguson said, Ms. Loftus, we can take that down. Ms. Berstler, what ultimately happened with the G Club account?
They were forced to transfer out.
And what do you mean by that?
Morgan Stanley closed the account and told them to transfer the money to another G Club account.
And do you know where the money was transferred?
I do not.
Do you know who Bo Collins is?
Sorry. What was the name?
Bo Collins?
No.
Mr. Ferguson said, may I have a moment, Your Honor?
The court said you may.
Mr. Ferguson said, nothing further, Your Honor.
The court said, cross-examination.
Mr. Skirek said, thank you, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. By Mr. Skirek.
Hi. Good afternoon, Ms. Berstler. Just a couple of questions about your preparation for testimony today. Did you meet with the government lawyers here before giving testimony here today?
Yes.
Okay. And when I say meet, I mean, sort of by phone or video conference or in person.
Yes.
Okay. And how many times did you meet with them?
3.
Okay. And were those 3 times all by video conference?
1 video conference and 2 in person.
Okay. And if you can just tell me, who was there when you met with them? To the best of your recollection.
My first 2 meetings were with Micah, and my third meeting was with Ryan.
And was there anyone else there besides Micah on the first 2 occasions and Mr. Fergenson, sick, on the third?
Yes, but I don't know the names.
Okay. Fair enough. Was there anyone else from Morgan Stanley there with you?
Yes.
Okay. And who was that?
Jeremy Weiner.
And is Mr. Weiner an attorney for Morgan Stanley?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
The court said, Mr. Skirek, please speak into the microphone.
Mr. Skirek said, yes. Apologies, Your Honor. Now you testified that you worked as an administrative assistant to a number of Morgan Stanley financial advisors. Right.
Yes.
And approximately how many do you cover at any given time? A bunch, I'm guessing.
5.
Okay. And that includes Ms. Schatz.
Yes.
All right. And Ms. Schatz was the primary point of contact for G Clubs.
Yes.
On the G Clubs account for Morgan Stanley.
Yes.
Okay. And you testified that, withdrawn. Do you recall that G Club's business was as a membership services company?
Yes.
Okay. And that it offered perks or services to its members?
I don't know what they offered.
Okay. But it was a membership services company, to your understanding?
Yes.
All right. And were you working with Ms. Schatz when G Clubs first became a client of Morgan Stanley?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall whether, at the time that G Clubs became a client, Ms. Schatz met in person with anyone from G Clubs?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you know if she ever met with anyone in person from G Clubs?
Mr. Fergenson said, objection. It's fine, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer. You may answer.
I don't know.
Okay. And you mentioned someone named Alex, I'm going to give it a shot here, Hadjikaralambis. If that's the correct pronunciation. You recall mentioning him during your testimony?
Yes, yes.
And he was a representative of G Clubs, I think you testified on direct, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever meet, we'll just call him Alex H.
No.
And you don't know whether Ms. Schatz ever met Alex H.
No.
Or Yvette Wong, for that matter.
Who?
Yvette Wong.
No, I don't know.
And do you know whether Ms. Schatz ever went to the G Club's office on East 64th Street here in town?
I don't know.
Okay. Now I believe you testified that G Club's accounts were first opened at Morgan Stanley in December of 2020, or thereabouts.
Millimeter.
Does that sound right?
Yes.
And do you know when they were closed, approximately? Just the best of your recollection.
Late summer 2021.
Okay. So August, September 2021, something in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay. And during the time that its account was open at Morgan Stanley. I believe you testified on direct that G Clubs used the account to pay for all kinds of, ordinary business expenses, is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So they used it to pay vendors, for example.
Yes.
You're aware of this. And they used it to pay taxes, for example.
I don't know if taxes were paid.
Okay. And you knew this because your role was to sort of handle these kinds of client requests for payment, right?
Yes.
And I believe you testified on direct you would handle like client requests for wires, right?
Yes.
And sort of other operational kind of tasks.
Yes.
That clients would request of Morgan Stanley.
Yes.
Fair? Okay. All right. Now you also testified on direct I think that you had some interactions with people in the bank's compliance department. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And those interactions that you described when you were speaking with Mr. Ferguson were related to G clubs, right?
Yes.
Okay. And now since you started at Morgan Stanley in, I believe you said it was 2008.
Yes.
Okay. So you've been there for 16 years, approximately.
Yes.
Okay. Now since you started at Morgan Stanley in 2008, have you had multiple occasions to interact with the compliance department at Morgan Stanley?
Yes.
Okay. And you've had a number of occasions to withdrawn. And as part of that interaction, it's been because of various issues that have come up in other client accounts, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so I think included in compliance department. Just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, I believe you testified about like a fraud department earlier. Would you include that in compliance?
Fraud operations, yes.
Fraud, right, fair enough. Fraud operations. Okay. And then you also testified I think about an AML group. Would you consider that also to be in the compliance group within Morgan Stanley?
Yes, it is a compliance group.
Okay. All right. And now when it comes to the compliance function, I think you testified to this on direct. But just to be clear, you don't have any decision-making authority when it came to compliance-related issues, right?
I do not have any authority.
Okay. And so for example, you don't have decision-making authority when it comes to whether the bank approves a particular wire transfer request. As we were talking about, or as you were talking about a few moments ago.
Correct.
Okay. And Ms. Schatz didn't even have that authority, right?
Correct.
Okay. That's purely the compliance group.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now you also testified I believe on direct a bit about an entity called Crane. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And Crane had something to do with Drawn. Fair to say that Crane was some kind of consulting firm. In your understanding?
I don't know exactly what their role was.
Sure. Fair enough. But do you have an understanding, generally, about what Crane was?
No.
Okay. And so you didn't have any impression as to how Crane related to G clubs in any way?
No.
Okay. But you've heard the name Haitham Khaled, I think you testified, right?
Yes.
And you knew he was a representative of Crane?
Yes.
And are you aware that there was a lawsuit in which G clubs sued Crane?
No.
Okay. And are you aware that at some point G clubs severed its relationship with Crane?
No.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. Now I'd like to pull up, if we can, Government Exhibit MSS 112. And if we could just, well. Before we go there. Do you remember being asked some questions on direct about Government Exhibit MSS 112?
Yes.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. If we can just scroll down, please, to page 3. And I believe you talked to Mr. Ferguson on direct about this request for $1 million transfer.
Yes.
Okay. And actually, I want to correct myself. It was actually a transfer for £1 million sterling. Right, GBP. I know you saw a lot of these. This is the first one. 112 is the first transfer.
The court said, "Did you want to call her attention to a particular exhibit?"
Mr. Skirrick said, sure. Happy to, Your Honor. So what's being displayed in front of you, the email dated January 18, 2021, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And does this look like the email that you talked to Mr. Ferguson about on direct? About the $1 million GBP transfer? Do you recognize it?
Yes.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. And then if we can just please scroll up to the top of this. And all the way to the top. If we can, please. Okay. And if we can just zoom in on the top portion, where it begins, "Good morning, Liz." Okay. And again, you recall that you reviewed this on Direct, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you testified that this email from Alex H. that we're looking at right now, you see at the bottom there where he signs it. Alex H.
Yes.
Was in response to your request that G Clubs provide a purpose for the wire that was requested. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. And that request that you made to Alex H. originated with the compliance folks at Morgan Stanley. Right.
Yes.
And you were just passing it along. Passing the request along.
I was asking the question that I didn't know the answer to in their email.
Right. Fair enough. So is the distinction you're drawing that they asked you, you didn't know. So you then asked Alex H.
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, objection to form.
The court said, "That's very compound."
Mr. Skirrick said, "Fair enough, Your Honor." I'll rephrase.
The court said, "Okay."
So just to be clear, the process, or the sequence, was that the compliance department asked you if you knew what the purpose of the wire was, and you didn't know, right?
Correct.
So you took that request and then you just passed it on to Alex H., right?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection. Asked and answered.
Mr. Skirrick said, or clarifying, I think.
The court said, "I'll allow the answer."
Mr. Skirrick said, thank you.
I asked Alex for the reason of the wire, because it was the question in fraud operations email that I didn't know the answer to.
Okay. Fair enough. That's all I was asking. And his explanation here, and I'll just read it briefly, that this transfer was initiated from G Club Operations LLC to Fiesta Property Developments, a real estate holding company. Do you see that?
Yes.
Let's just pause there for a moment. And is it okay with you if we call G Club Operations just Operations, or Ops, just for short?
Okay.
Okay. And Fiesta Property, we'll just call Fiesta, okay.
Okay.
And Fiesta is described here as a real estate holding company, right?
Yes.
All right. And then as we continue on reading, it says, owned by Mr. He in the UK. Same owner of G Club Operations LLC. We'll stop there. And do you know who Mr. He is?
He was listed as the ultimate beneficial owner of G Club.
Okay. And Alex H. is telling you here that Mr. He is also the owner of Fiesta, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that he's located in the UK, right?
Yes.
All right. And then Alex continues, as we read. For a possible down payment on a property they plan to purchase for a total of $10 million. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And as you sit here today, does that language sound definitive to you?
I don't know.
Well, let's look at it. It says that the transfer was for a possible down payment on a property they plan to purchase. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. It doesn't say, we signed a contract to buy property and the payment is due next week, right?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection. The document speaks for itself, Your Honor.
Mr. Skirrick said, well, I'm just trying to clarify the witness's understanding.
The court said, "You can answer the question."
Can you repeat the question?
Mr. Skirrick said, sure. Could we have the court reporter read back the question? I'm sorry.
The court said, "Just take it in pieces, please."
Mr. Skirrick said, sure. So this doesn't say, for example, we signed a contract to buy property, right?
Correct.
And it doesn't say the down payment is due next week, right?
Correct.
It says that there was a plan, words in the document, for a possible.
Mr. Ferguson said, objection to mischaracterizing the document.
The court said, Are you claiming that he's not reading the words accurately?
Mr. Ferguson said, I'll withdraw it, Your Honor.
The court said, okay. Go ahead.
By Mr. Skirek.
So it says that there is a plan, right?
Yes.
Prospective, right?
Yes.
Not definitive, right?
Yes.
Tentative sounding, right?
Mr. Ferguson said, Objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
For a possible down payment, not definite, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now you were asked on direct by Mr. Ferguson whether you reviewed additional information about the loan that's referenced between Ops and Fiesta. Do you remember him asking you that?
No.
Did you receive any additional information about the loan from Ops and Fiesta?
No.
Okay. Did you ask for any additional information about the loan from Ops to Fiesta?
No.
Right. You didn't, right? And did you receive a copy of the loan agreement?
No.
No. But you didn't ask for a copy of the loan agreement, right?
No.
Okay. And did you receive a copy of the real estate purchase contract?
No.
That's because Morgan Stanley didn't ask for a copy of the real estate purchase contract, right?
Mr. Ferguson said, Objection, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer.
No.
Just to clarify, Morgan Stanley did not ask for that, right?
Correct.
Mr. Skirek said, okay. Now if we can please go to what's in evidence MSS 125. And just take a second to look at this. Do you see the date at the top of this email, January 20th, 2021?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember talking to Mr. Ferguson about this a few minutes ago, before the lunch break?
Yes.
Okay. And this is the email that came from fraud operations asking for the information about the purpose of the wire, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Deirdre Harrell is the one who sends this, correct? I'm sorry. Withdrawn. Mr. Skirek said, let's, if we could, go to, just for clarity, if you can go to, I'm sorry. Just give me a moment. Just go to page 11 of this document. Jorge, the Bates number on the bottom. Yeah, perfect. Great. Thank you. And I believe you reviewed this with Mr. Ferguson, and the question that was asked by the compliance was as relevant here. The purpose of the wire, which is in the box 2 up from the bottom on the left. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the question to which you were responding, right?
Yes.
Okay. And ultimately that. Mr. Skirek said, if we can go page 8, please. And we can see here again in the box that is on the left labeled, purpose of the wire, manually input, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And what's reflected in the box to the right there is what you manually input, is that right?
Yes.
And it reads, this is a wire to an affiliated business for real estate investment. Right.
Yes.
Now that description doesn't have any of the tentative quality to it that Mr. or that Alex H's answer had. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And ultimately this information is what's forwarded to the fraud department, right?
Yes.
And they make their decision based on this information.
Yes.
The fraud department never receives Alex H's email, right?
Correct.
They never receive the tentative sounding email, right?
Correct.
Okay. So they didn't have the benefit of that, fair?
Yes. MSS 113.
Mr. Skirek said, okay. Now if we can please go to. And do you recall this document, the January 27, 2021, email which you discussed with Mr. Ferguson on direct?
Yes.
And this relates to a different wire than the set of documents that we just reviewed, right?
I believe so.
Okay. It was a second wire in a series of wires that you went through on direct, right?
Yes.
Okay. And this second wire was authorized based on the same information that you manually input for the benefit of the compliance department. Right.
Yes.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. And if we could go to MSS 114. Now again, you reviewed this with Mr. Ferguson on direct, and this, withdrawn. Do you recall discussing this document with Mr. Ferguson on direct?
Yes.
February 3, 2021 email chain.
Yes.
And this relates to yet another wire, correct?
Yes.
And this one too was authorized based on the information that you manually input, correct?
Yes.
Which lacked the tentative quality that we agreed upon earlier, right?
Yes.
You agreed with me that Alex H's email had a tentative quality to it, right? His explanation had a timely quality.
Yes.
And that is not included here, right?
No.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. Now let's please go to MSS 119. And this is a June 21, 2021 email chain. Do you recall reviewing this with Mr. Ferguson earlier?
Yes. Bit.
Mr. Skirrick said, and if we scroll down in the document right there. If we blow up that bottom page, please, Jorge. Bottom of the page. And this relates to a $35 million wire transfer request, is that right?
Yes.
And the request is that the wire be sent to Hamilton Digital Assets FDSP, right?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know, withdrawn? I believe you testified on direct that you don't know what Hamilton is, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you don't know what agreements, if any, are in place between Hamilton and G clubs, right?
Correct.
You just don't have that information.
Correct.
In a way you could, right?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, you may answer the question. Is the question could she have asked? Is that what you were saying? You wouldn't ask her to speculate though.
Mr. Skirrick said, no. Could have asked for that information, right?
The court said, well, that is speculation. Are you saying was she able to ask? Is that the question?
Mr. Skirrick said, yes. That's fair, Your Honor.
The court said, okay. Go ahead.
By Mr. Skirrick.
Could Morgan Stanley have asked for that?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection.
The court said, I just want to stay away from the could have piece.
Mr. Skirrick said, fair enough.
The court said, did Morgan Stanley have the ability to ask?
The witness said, yes.
The court said, go ahead.
By Mr. Skirrick.
Okay. But Morgan Stanley didn't ask, right?
Mr. Ferguson said, asked and answered, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained. Okay. Move on.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. If we can please go to MSS 120. And sort of home in on the bottom of this one as well, please. And Ms. Berstler, this email relates to yet another request for a wire transfer, right?
Yes.
And this one's for $15 million to Hamilton Digital Assets FDSP, right?
Yes.
And again. Morgan Stanley did not ask for the agreement that was in place between Hamilton and G Club that relates to this wire. Right.
Correct.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. Now let's please go to MSS 124. Okay. And this is an August 5, 2021 email chain, correct?
Yes.
This email chain relates to a returned wire that you talked to Mr. Ferguson about a few minutes ago. Right.
Yes.
Okay. And this is about 2 weeks or so after the Fiesta wire for 2.6 withdrawn. This email is about 2 weeks after a failed wire transfer that was initiated by Morgan Stanley, is that right?
I don't know if it was failed.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. Well, if we just scroll down in the document a little bit. And we can blow up there. Alex H's email, July 29, 2021. Do you see that?
Yes.
Importance is high, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And it says, good afternoon, Christina. Attached you'll find the wire that was returned to us. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So does that refresh your recollection that this was a failed wire transfer?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I believe you testified on direct that at this point the account was blocked from any third-party transactions. Correct?
Yes.
And based on your experience at Morgan Stanley, sometimes accounts are blocked from third-party transactions by compliance, right?
Yes.
Okay. And this was in August of 2021, right?
This was in July.
Fair enough. If we zoom out and scroll up, you'll see that the top email is August 5, 2021.
Yes.
Okay. And to the best of your recollection, is this when the accounts for G Clubs first became blocked at Morgan Stanley?
I don't remember the timing.
Okay. Well, do you recall any blocked wire transfers before this?
I don't remember.
Okay. So you don't remember one way or another.
Mr. Ferguson said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Do you believe you would remember had it been blocked earlier?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection.
The court said, all right. So the speculation in asking these hypotheticals, please don't do that.
Mr. Skirek said, thank you, Your Honor. Okay. Now you testified earlier that you had experience with the bank's compliance department over your 16-year career at Morgan Stanley. Right.
Yes.
And would you agree with me that Morgan Stanley is, you know, one of the biggest banks in the world?
Yes.
Okay. And it has a global reputation.
Yes.
And to sort of be blunt about it, Morgan Stanley is a big deal in the banking world, right?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection to relevance.
The court said, I want to know if she has the opinion that her employer is a big deal. You may answer.
Mr. Skirek said, in the banking world.
Morgan Stanley is a large bank.
Okay. Fair enough. Has it been your experience that the bank is sensitive to its reputation?
I don't know.
Is it sensitive to risks to its reputation?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's fair enough. And do you have a general understanding of how the bank reacts when it receives a subpoena from the government inquiring about a bank customer?
No.
Okay. Have you had the experience in your 16-year working career at Morgan Stanley where a bank customer that you were involved with, that Morgan Stanley received a subpoena related to that customer?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection to form.
The court said, are you asking whether in the past she's aware that a Morgan Stanley customer received a subpoena? Is that the question?
Mr. Skirek said, the question is whether she's aware of, in the past, Morgan Stanley has received a subpoena related to a customer, a Morgan Stanley customer that she's worked with.
The court said, you may answer.
I don't know.
Okay. In your experience with the compliance department, would it be a red flag for the compliance department to receive a subpoena about a bank customer?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you know whether Morgan Stanley received a subpoena from the government related to G Clubs?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Did you ever ask compliance whether that happened?
No.
And did they ever tell you whether that happened?
No.
Okay. So you don't know whether the bank receiving a subpoena is.
Mr. Ferguson said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained. You can't ask that question.
All right. So the G Clubs funds at Morgan Stanley's account, those funds belong to G Clubs, right? Fair to say.
Yes.
Okay. And from the bank's point of view, G Clubs owns those funds, right?
Yes.
And it can do what it wants with those funds.
Yes.
And G Clubs doesn't have to ask Morgan Stanley's position to use its funds, right?
They need to put in a request to withdraw funds.
Sure. But it doesn't have to ask Morgan Stanley for permission about how to use the funds is the question.
Mr. Ferguson said, asked and answered.
Mr. Skirek said, I think it's a different, the witness answered a different question.
The court said, you may answer.
Can you ask the question again?
Sure. G Clubs doesn't have to ask Morgan Stanley for permission as to how to use its farms, right?
Correct.
So when the compliance department asks what the purpose of a wire is, it's just looking for information. Right.
Mr. Ferguson said, objection.
The court said, overruled. If you know, you may answer.
What was the question?
Let's try it this way. Is it your understanding that one of the purposes of Morgan Stanley's compliance department, including the fraud department, is to protect customers?
It's to protect the client and the firm.
Sure, both. That's right. To protect both, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Ferguson said, objection to commentary.
The court said, overruled. Let's go.
Now as long as, withdrawn. Based on your experience. As long as the purpose for a wire was a business purpose, you would have passed that information along to the fraud department, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. So for example, G clubs could have said that the purpose.
The court said, all right. Here we go with the hypotheticals again. No hypotheticals.
Mr. Skirek said, Your Honor, may we have a brief sidebar?
The court said yes.
Continued on next page. At the sidebar.
Mr. Skirek said, So Your Honor, during direct, the government was allowed to ask questions about what the witness would or would not have passed along in terms of the information she was provided. And the government asked a number of hypothetical questions about that. And I raised this issue this morning at 9 o'clock about the hypothetical questions. And I think really all the defense is trying to do is be able to ask hypothetical questions on the other side of this issue.
The court said, we know that's what you're trying to do.
Mr. Ferguson said, I think just the key point is, if he wants to ask, if a client gave you false information, would you take steps to process that wire? That's okay, but I don't know what the other.
Mr. Skirek said, That's the question you want to ask, not the question I want to ask.
The court said, it's just that the hypotheticals are permitted in order to elicit evidence concerning the fraud. You're not asking about fraud.
Mr. Skirek said, Well, Your Honor.
The court said, your hypothetical does not bear on fraud.
Mr. Skirek said, Well, Your Honor, I think it does. I think the hypothetical is to suss out whether the witness would have passed along the information had she been provided with information. With different information to show that she would have passed that information along all the same. She's testified it's not her job to make these decisions.
The court said, wasn't your question whether she would pass along information concerning a business purpose use of funds?
Mr. Skirek said, Well, the original question, which I think was already asked and answered, was whether if there was any business purpose, if she would have passed that along. I think she already answered that question. We can look at the record. My understanding is.
The court said, one moment. Let's go back to business purpose.
Record read.
Mr. Skirek said, So she's already answered the answer to this question. So I'm just trying to ask questions for illustrative purposes further to that question.
The court said, what is it you wanted to ask?
Mr. Skirek said, Right. So the witness has agreed that as long as the purpose was a business purpose, that she would have passed the information along.
The court said, okay.
Mr. Skirek said, So the idea is, we should be able to ask 2 additional questions about examples of these business purposes to show that there was no reason for G clubs to conceal what its prior use of that funds was. Because it wouldn't.
The court said, so there's no objection after the business purpose question. Am I correct? The reporter is.
Mr. Ferguson said, so that's.
The court said, you let that one in.
Mr. Ferguson said, yeah, I let them do that. I don't think you get to go and speculate about further illustrative examples. That's just calling for speculation.
The court said, what's your example?
Mr. Skirek said, that they said that they planned to purchase a high-end sports car for use for members. That would have been passed along all the same.
Mr. Ferguson said, but they didn't. I mean, that's the whole point.
The court said, so I would have sustained the objection had one been made, and so I don't think 2 wrongs will make a right. So I'm not going to permit the question.
Mr. Skirek said, okay, Your Honor. Thank you.
Continued on next page. In open court.
Mr. Skirek said, thank you.
By Mr. Skirek.
Ms. Berstler, just a couple more questions. Now Alex H. expressed a tentative plan for Fiesta to withdrawn.
Mr. Ferguson said, objection.
Alex H. expressed. Mr. Skirek said, are you objecting to me withdrawing? No. Okay. Ms. Berstler, Alex H. expressed that Fiesta had a tentative plan for a possible purchase of real estate. We talked about that earlier, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the tentative element of his explanation didn't get passed along to fraud operations, right?
Correct.
So we have no idea what fraud operations would have said had that information been passed along, right?
Mr. Ferguson said, objection. Calls for speculation.
The court said, sustained. Don't ask her to speculate.
Mr. Skirek said, I tried, Your Honor. No further questions, Ms. Berstler.
The court said, redirect.
Mr. Ferguson said, thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Loftus, could we please publish MSS 112?
Redirect examination. By Mr. Ferguson.
Ms. Berstler, you were asked questions about the emails from Alex H. regarding the Fiesta transfers. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, sorry. Just a moment. Thank you. And Ms. Berstler, you were asked questions about this initial wire request to Fiesta from Alex H. Do you recall that on cross?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson said, and Ms. Loftus, if we can zoom on the top email. Now before we turn to this exact email, Ms. Berstler. Do you know why the $10 million request was broken into 3 different requests?
No.
Mr. Skirek said, objection, scope.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Do you know why the $10 million request was broken into 3 different wire transfers?
No.
Do you know why Alex H. specified that there was a repayment plan for this loan?
Mr. Skirek said, same objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
No.
Do you know if this loan was ever actually repaid at all?
No.
Ms. Berstler, does this email say anything about Milesungwa?
No.
Mr. Skirek said, objection. Document speaks for itself.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Does it say anything about someone named Changwa?
No.
Does it say anything about how Milesungwa is the settler of the foundation that owns G clubs?
Mr. Skirek said, objection.
The court said, overruled.
Does it say anything about how Milesungwa is the settler of the foundation that owns G clubs?
No.
Does it say anything about a Ferrari?
Mr. Skirek said, objection.
No. No.
The court said, overruled.
Does it say anything about FXXKEVO Ferrari?
No.
Does it say anything about the Stichting Still We Rise?
No.
Mr. Ferguson said, nothing further, Your Honor.
The court said, recross.
Recross examination. By Mr. Skirek.
At the risk of asking you further things that we all know you don't know the answer to. Do you know that this loan had a 10-year term?
No.
Mr. Skirek said, thank you. No further questions.
The court said, any Riri?
Mr. Ferguson said, no, Your Honor.
The court said, all righty. You may step out of the courtroom.
The witness said, thank you.
The court said, thank you.
Witness excused.